Ooh, damn, almost forgot. Right. So, most probably, this will be probably a quiet stream. I know even my members are not prepared for this. In fact, I wasn't prepared for this myself. Let's see that the sound works and everything. I wasn't really planning on going live. I was more so planning on making a video, but given how time constrained I am, really I'm quite busy. A bit of a crazy day, so I found myself instead doing this live real quick. This is gonna be a quick market update. Give me a sec, boys and girls. I'm gonna get all my blah blah here prepared so I can see the. Well, why can't I see the chat? The chat is being annoying. Oh, okay. Now that'll be good. In case anybody pops in, so I'll see the chat as well. Right. Howdy, as Casey says. Okay, so shout out to a couple of my members. You beautiful legend. I just, yeah. Casey, how's the sound? Is the sound good, or is it too sharp? Is it too loud? Let me know. So actually, originally I was planning on making this into a video, but given how time constrained I got, and I realized if I'll make a video, it will take forever for it to process and upload. Instead, I'll just make this quick live. So there were well, shout out to FL and shout out to Noi, a couple of members in my community who asked about this, and so I will address this. First of all, what is it that you guys are looking at? I'll actually bring you up to speed. The way it works in my community, first of all, as I always say, my community are the most up to speed, are sort of updated to things first. So what I usually do when I have the time, I go to my Discord. There is a dedicated channel, the Greg's Charts channel, right? So here we're going kind of towards the beginning of today. So today I was, of course, as always, processing the charts, sort of giving everyone updates and so on and so on. And then at some point, there was an expectation to what I thought to fill in the gap. At first, we had a bit of a gap right there, or at least so we thought so. Pardon me, my voice is a bit crackling now. I guess I'm getting sick or whatever. So we thought we'll have a little bit of a gap around that vicinity, around the 6,900 to close, to fill in. Turned out that was basically missing data, like a hole in the data, if you will, that sometimes happens. And if anything, that usually will not occur. That sort of occurrence does not happen in the market open, market close. Usually that sort of occurrence, when it happens throughout the trading session itself, that is actually quite normal to then figure out that it was a hole in the data, if you will, for one reason or another. There are many reasons why that can happen. And eventually, once the data was filled in, we realized we don't really have a gap there to fill. So once I've come to understand that, I've immediately, of course, notified my members. Here it is. I kind of notified everyone. I said, so the gap is gone. It was a hole in the data. So, and then from there on out, of course, as we proceeded with the day, with the pre-market, I've analyzed and saw how we will be potentially having this sort of move. Sounds great. Oh, yeah, awesome. So this sort of thing gets oftentimes misinterpreted. First of all, you need to understand that this was drawn on the 30 minutes chart. So that means that doesn't really allow me to put, and then when it gets analyzed on the 1 minute chart, I'll show you exactly how that looks like. So kind of, where are we now? Oh, I'm in the wrong chart. I wondered why. Okay, so the way it's done, is this way, right? So that's kind of how I drew it, and that was roughly the intention, of course. So for example, just kind of highlighting the overall pattern expected. In fact, if I wanted to be precise, I would go yay low. And the expectation was either to go roughly to these highs or to these highs. So as you can see, again, That's why oftentimes I mark this as general guidance. So as you can see right there, that was the intention to where we're going to make it. And the reason it doesn't really hit the spot all that perfectly, even first of all, we're not trying to time the market. It never is an attempt to time the market. For example, so why am I explaining this? Because my members asked whether we are, basically they couldn't understand whether we were at one stage or another. Second of all, as you can see, if it only is if I'm following and tracing the price action throughout the day attentively, I can tell you exactly whether we're going to continue to a particular high or not. So as you saw rather on the Discord, what the hell did I do with the Discord? Right, I have a picture on, I forgot. So, and then you see it how it just is drawn in the smaller time frame, how it appears basically, because it stretches out what it is that I'm drawing on a larger time frame, so it kind of stretches it out. So there was never an intention to get these markings in terms of how long will it take. The idea here is to mark the destinations, right, the price action destinations to which we can retest. Of course, for example, when I do that, I don't mean this empty spot in space, pardon me. In reality, what I mean is potentially the very same support or resistance level that played a role right there, or actually reaching out all the way to 68.35.36. So again, this is this is not intentional to draw precisely what expected. For that, I'll have to sit there and trace the price action all day. I was actually pretty busy, like I said. So the intention is a little bit different. The intention is to give general guidance. So now let's observe at what we traced sort of throughout the session. You can see that the reason I'm showing this is you can see how early on was that drawn. We were basically just at the beginning of today's session, if you will. And so you see how it ended up playing out. So far, we actually see it on the screen in the background. I was updating and keeping everyone up to speed as we were progressing, right? So for me, for example, as we progress throughout the sessions and get closer and closer and closer, like for example, right there, we pierced, penetrated, whatever you want to call it, right above that level that I drawn. Again, the intention is not to give a precise level. Usually I name precise levels, give or take. In this instance, it wasn't clear which will be the levels. As you can see, we are kind of moving about between major areas. So, I'm not going to say there are no support or resistance levels. They are just not major enough to acknowledge them, at least not to the vastness of the public, because if I'll draw every single support and resistance level I'm aware of, that'll be just impossible for you, the public, the YouTube viewer who doesn't understand everything on my chart will be very discombobulated and confused. So this is, again, general guidance. Now let's observe what the price action in reality is doing in comparison to what my overall expectation was. Because again, for me, that is to each their own. I'm not going to tell you guys how to judge this or see this. For me, in my humble opinion, the way I perceive that sort of analysis, more than good enough, right? In this instance, though, we are actually shooting, I mean, the same way we overshot the high point I've targeted, the same way we are overshooting the low point. But let's see whether that actually is going to pan out to be sort of, to give a correction, to sort of show how this played out in relativity to how I meant it, right? So we are just now have made the second point, and now we're moving to the third point, right? Which of course that's not going to be it. For that, we'll have to either shoot pretty much go back in time or shoot straight up, which obviously unlikely to happen within the framework of the last 25 minutes of the session. So pardon me, boys and girls, looks like I'm coming down with something. Hopefully that will be obviously into the weekend, right? Makes sense. Casey, looks like you're the only viewer I have. This says for everyone else for later to watch. Obviously, it's a Friday. I didn't expect anyone to be here, nor did anyone get notified, nor did I post about it, so I don't really mind. But I do hope you guys will end up watching this to understand the principle and what it is that I'm trying to highlight here. And so in the grand scheme of things, for all I care, this is our entanglement within the region of that 6835.36. Of course, it's not accurate in that sense that we are slipping below. And in fact, if we really want to see things objectively, we are headed even lower with some more bearish momentum, right? If we look to the 5 minutes, which will be better to look at with regards to towards the end of the session, it does feel like we're coming to a conclusion of a downtrend right there, and will not be all that surprising. It will start picking up. The question is whether that will do that in today's session. Arguably, we are just a little, tiny, maybe a couple of inches away from getting started moving there, couple of millimeters, whatever you want to call it, right? From convergence, from confluence of the forces, giving way to bullish, given how the order and the structure of these impulses are, I would assess that at this point we are more than done with this downwards trend. Our entanglement, although it appears to be, and again I'll explain that this is very well understood in my community, although it appears to be how we are in kind of entangled with nothing, there is of course probably some level of support resistance, some sort of support resistance level around here. This is why we're actually stopping at it, but we would not stop if we would not have this major level at play. What we are actually seeing is the entanglement. The price action is about to start revolving around that level, probably potentially retesting it for into next session, into Monday, in essence. And so what I still assess, since we have made that first move, second move, so it's kind of like it is equal to what if in comparison to what I've drawn earlier. Well, yeah, that's not really visible. If in comparison to what I've drawn earlier throughout the day today, that is the first, that is the second, right? So we've made the first and the second, and now we're moving into our third impulse. That is going to be a bullish impulse. As we can see, we are preparing for that transition. Of course, it is not clear, and we have to remember that on Monday we're going to have pre-market that may be volatile, and we may end up opening somewhere higher just to draw back to that level, entangle with it, and only then proceed here. This is not a time destination. It's more and more so, just to highlight, in fact on purpose I wrote ish, which by the way, the ish refers to that 6,900 handle, that area. It doesn't mean it's going to be precisely that number, and we're not going to pierce through that, a couple of inches higher, a couple of inches lower, entangling up and down, but still the result expected to be give or take that, meaning we will move around that handle at least for a little bit, test it at the end of the overall process. Unfortunately, by the way, you kind of see, of course, by then the conviction will be tremendously bullish. Everything is fine, don't worry, everything going back to normal. Well, no, in fact, and remember, it doesn't have to stop this way. We may end up seeing again a retest of 6,929.95. That may occur as well, right? This level may end up being retested, given how close we will end up if we are actually moving towards these levels, given what we saw on larger time frames, which again we're going to look at in a second. 5 people are watching. Who else is here? I don't know, hiding. Some gremlins. We have gremlins. My channel has gremlins. That's at least it has that. I mean, given how the neglect I get from YouTube. YouTube literally does not I used to complain that people don't want to know, and I think I'm starting to think that's kind of wrong. I think people do want to know. The problem is that YouTube does not let them know. If YouTube is not going to share my channel and let people choose to watch these videos, they will never know. So in essence, it seems like YouTube chooses to prevent people from either, not losing money and definitely making money. So that's definitely a good thing for YouTube there, right? Great, I guess, whatever. Good job, YouTube. Still, by the way, reminder, in case YouTube is still confused about that, it's a financial channel, stock market channel. I talk about stocks and the stock market, okay? So just not mean. I can't be any clearer, YouTube. All right, so let's go over the time frames. So 5 minutes we saw on plus. 5 minutes is really not that important within the context of things. Well, 30 minutes actually, I have to be objective about this. 30 minutes actually looks tremendously bearish, given how we are bearish dominant, and there are no signs of confluence, of crossover of the forces. It appears like we're moving clearly downwards and not planning to stop anytime soon. We have our center line, of course, the 50. Once we pierce that, in fact, we become even more bearish. Right now, we still are bearish and bullish territory. So what we kind of get is an amalgam of both, kind of that mixture of bullish and bearish. So in essence, more so sideways than anything. But once we pierce over that 50 range, given the lack of a crossover or even any near form of divergence we're having here, convergence, sorry, it is remaining as divergent as it can from one another, and so that indicates the continuation of a downtrend, which is not that good. That means we may end up testing lower than what, significantly lower than what I thought originally. Of course, I was kind of aiming at this target to be more precise. Again, those who don't understand, those are the levels I imagined we will end up stalling at, reversing. And again, this is still acceptable. I probably should clean all this stuff up. You guys can't see anything on the screen anymore, probably. Just keep kind of what's important, right? So my initial thought with drawing this, as you can see, again, don't just pay attention. Those are kind of rough sketches to highlight what the general guidance is, right? If anything, I would look at that lowest point, which more so intended to be here. I just was never trying to be that precise. I hope people understand whether there's nothing else that I'm trying to mark. We are referring to this. I don't need to hope. I know my academy students understand that. But otherwise, again, if I wanted to be precise, I would highlight that and write about it in the Discord, as I usually do. But so yeah, just to kind of highlight things, it still looks like we're bearish. Again, it's not there is no insistence, oh, my analysis from the morning has to be right. No, that was simply the analysis from the morning. In fact, it was based on the futures and not actually the regular day-to-day contract. So I'm not gonna mind that much being all that wrong. That doesn't worry me. In fact, more so we can end up with a head and shoulders that is tilted a little bit to the down. None of these patterns is pattern breaking, so all of these are possible. Again, we're more so looking for destination rather than anything else. More so, I want to highlight how much of a tiny fragment of everything really that is, because once we zoom out just a tiny little bit, we're gonna realize we're now just preoccupied with the tiny little basically this. It is the same thing as thinking, you understand what's really going on, what's the bigger picture, by focusing or seeing just this on your screen, because that is what we're looking at when we're hyper focused on that little area. Although that is why it's so important, imperative to be aware of the overall cycle and see whether the market is basically spilling over, because we already gone through this flattening of the trend, that very shallow movement that became over time basically flat, and now potentially going to spill over to the back end of the cyclicality, which in essence is bearish, right? And quite prolonged and very painful to those who are unprepared. In fact, I made a whole bunch of videos talking about this recently and sort of warning those who insist on not seeing or saying, I don't know, all sorts of things. People just really, I don't know what people think anymore. It really does remind me of back in the day when I was just, a dumbass junior and just started working in the industry. And I got all sorts of clients who were certain they know better than anyone else. And even then I found it a little bit weird, and now I find it even more aggressive than ever before, because people think that, they ask ChatGPT a couple of questions and now they know how to do technical analysis. The funny thing is, I'll just remind you the same way ChatGPT or any other AI or screws up very badly. Guess what? With regards to other things, guess what? It probably screws up the same way, maybe even worse, with regards to this sort of thing. There's a reason why my profession still exists, and probably, in fact, outlive many other professions. But let's not get into that. Just to explain that, for the last 20 years, people have been trying to do exactly that, replace people like myself with various bots and AI, and so far, very miserably unsuccessful. So, I doubt that's going to happen anytime soon. Anywho, so what are we looking at here? As we said, 30 minutes is still very bearish. The bad part here of things is that also our 45 minutes is very bearish, which also, for me, it's not all that bad. I have a bearish position, right? But I'm trying to remain, again, objective here about what we see in the technical analysis, or rather what is expected and makes sense or should happen. And in all reality, this is very clear divergence, which signals that we are about to enter a really strong bearish phase. Which, of course, if we enter a strong bearish phase, we're not really going to do that, you know? And so that will mean I was wrong to some extent. Absolutely. I don't mind. I've been saying we're going to drop, you know, sometime soon for quite a long time. And as I've been indicating, any one of these turns could be the one. So let's just clean this up again a little bit so you guys can see stuff better. So we were at 45 minutes. We were saying 45 minutes is just as bearish as 30 minutes. Let's look at the 1 hour. 1 hour. 1 hour is quite bearish as well. 1 hour becoming significantly. 1 hour is actually scary bearish because it's not just bearish dominant, but it also is in bearish territory, giving it full way on to full bearish momentum. In other words, what this is showing, that current sort of structure, is easily indicating towards 67.92, 67.74, 67.65. Easy. In fact, arguably, I would say, given the extent of the time frame, we may be looking even over some slippage lower down. Well, pardon me, from the wrong place. But we're basically looking at the potential significant push even lower to retest these very levels we've tested many times before. As you can see, these levels are quite significant, have been in fact here all along for quite a long time, to the point some of you may think they were generated because of the gaps. That is not true. The gaps are just a secondary side effect that goes to show where these levels already are. Gaps sometimes help expose where the levels are located. Not always. It's this sort of, you know, not every red hat is a fireman hat, but every fireman hat is red. You know what I mean? That's kind of that analogous. And so really the gaps are just a side effect, if anything, just for those who don't understand. And those levels were here at play at first. In fact, if I'll stretch these out to the left, you'll see they were acknowledged even prior. For example, right here, you can see. How about, of course, that? And again, to identify how accurately these levels were acknowledged, as you can see right there, earlier and earlier, probably these and these as well. Internally, we're going to need to switch over to the 1 minute, in which case we will then be able to see the minutia, the internals of the price action on a smaller fragmented time frame, which will then allow us to actually perceive this entanglement, these retests, the minor retests that are hidden or engulfed, if you will, inside these larger time frame candlesticks at the moment. So again, going to what we see here is that the price action is very negative, very bearish at the moment on the 1 hour. It does seem like we're looking at some form of confluence right here on the 4 hourly, but we have to acknowledge the same way, guys, we've seen these phenomena to the upside. Now these phenomena start to happen to the downside. It's just that, I mean, it depends on your bias. If you want to acknowledge that that's how things work, right, and understand, and of course, more so if you want to learn, join the community and all that great stuff. You know, links are in the description below, and you have here right below me this beautiful link, the patreon.com/Greg_Ori_H. That is my Patreon. Join in, join the community. The prices are 50% discounted on the members tier that you can join. That $50 tier you will be able to see. And of course, on the One-on-One Academy, it's also right now, actually the One-on-One Academy is 60% discounted. It's actually only 4K instead of the original 10,000 as it was meant to be, or as it was rather. So again, on the 4 hourly, because it does appear like we're moving towards confluence, and normally people would assess that this is a sign that we will have again a strong bullish impulse, whether we will end up reaching that low and then a strong bullish impulse back to where we were, so kind of changing nothing. I will admit that this may be the case at this stage. It's too premature to determine that that is not the case, right? I would not say that. But we will see exactly what I mean in the larger time frames, and more so what I want to highlight and for that you guys need to understand, given all that bearish reserved momentum we see in the smaller time frames, which will start occurring as we progress into, you know, Monday in its pre-market actual session. And if that momentum is that bearish, it will of course influence how this looks like, meaning it will pull apart these two limbs that are currently being generated, if you will, those who look like as if they're moving towards that convergence, right, towards that crossover. Basically what will happen with our bearish momentum, it will capitulate and will start opening up, giving way to this kind of different form, different angle. And so that will then not going to be a signal for confluence and not a potential turnaround, right? So what appears to be right now in potential bullish sometime soon may end up not being this way when we're going to see all that bearish momentum play out and see how it affects this. Okay, we have to consider things forward as we're seeing, depending on what, because the smaller time frames are the same thing as kind of zooming in on this and actually seeing what's happening inside instead of seeing it in this bulky form, if you will. So the daily again, that's the reason I'm also worried. And as I said before, it did appear like some of that these smaller time frames were the ones that potentially had some bullish momentum that could have played out. You see, by the way, again, now you can actually see the more we go to higher time frames, how that very same drawing that is ginormous, basically, it takes up the entire screen. Now on these time frames, it basically becomes just these two columns. The entire argument is about literally a column and a half. I mean, a regular day and a Friday, right? Which at times is very low volume, so may be considered as a half day, not in terms of time, but in terms of what it does to the market. So, in reality, we're too hyper-focused on, of course, but again, what I show in the Discord is for people to understand and see how these processes of analyses really happen over time and how we follow up and what is the more important bit and what it is that we're watching over. In essence, what is the sort of the overall outcome? So yeah, it may end up being that my overall assessment with this correction to the upside may end up turning wrong. Of course, I would not jump to any conclusions. I would say, have some patience. It still may end up and turn around because of some announcement. All of these things are, at the end of the day, as we just saw, are short-term volatility, and so I'm not going to be all that surprised. Like I said, if eventually towards Monday we're going to have, for some weird reason or just some impulse of volume coming out of nowhere, even generating a gap to the upside, like so, kind of pushing us, maybe generating a gap right here, opening up here, pushing higher, just then to break. Absolutely a possibility. I'm not insisting on being correct. I'm just actually saying what I've seen happen before, and that is not abnormal given sort of the overall instruction we see in the continuous contract on the futures. It's like the two things do not negate one another. They go and flow together, right? They are not contradicting one another. They're still telling two different sides of the very same story. So going back to the daily, just to kind of continue with that narrative of bearish momentum that we saw and see what it actually means or where we're headed. So this still looks very, very bearish. We are still technically crossing over that 50 range, so it still is, mixture of forces. Yet this looks quite bearish, and arguably by Monday this will become even more bearish. Of course, as the day ends, we move into the following session. If it does become even more bearish, well, guess what? That will play out in terms of price action. And as I said, then it will be absolutely safe to assume we're moving towards the near range, stronger support resistance levels. Those are the 6,700 handle area. Now, weekly, the reason it's also worrying, all that stuff, that if we would have had any sort of glimpse of potential correction to the upside, that would have been right here in the on the weekly chart. It would have been visible. Unfortunately, as you can see, the weekly chart is also very bearish, and full-on bearish, meaning bearish dominant and in bearish territory, amplifying the effect. So to be honest, the market really does look like it's going to test lower again. And arguably, maybe I'm talking a little bit prematurely, but as you can imagine, there is some form of a level here. I don't have it on my screen right now. In fact, there are a couple of important levels within that vicinity. No, it doesn't really just perfectly pass by this bottom of this column. I'm just giving you kind of an average, and I'm trying, and yeah, maybe that's kind of what my intention was more than anything. So there are a couple of levels right here. I've mentioned them before. It's that 666 area and everything that is surrounding it, right? So the more lower end, the lower end of that 6,666 vicinity is actually basically 6,600. So don't be all that surprised that if we do reach out that low, given how our weekly starting to look like, and the rest of the smaller time frames are also very bearish. Well, we'll have to see how these things play out, because I don't have to tell you our monthly have been bearish and on that verge of confluence of forces for quite a long time, and indicating a preparation for a significant well, I'm not even going to call it pullback, because it's not a pullback. This is not a pullback. A pullback is what you can find on the 5 minutes and lasts for like an hour or two, or maybe a session or two. Okay, what we are seeing on the monthly, this is not a pullback. This is a major big correction. Okay, this is going to pull down at least easily. We're looking at some of these major levels, which is the 6,100 level. As you can imagine, we have our psychological flat 6,000. There are many. I'm not even going to acknowledge all of them. This indicates a very strong movement to the downside. In fact, arguably towards that 5,000 handle. Why? Well, it's not going to happen overnight, as you can imagine, since we're looking at the monthly chart. This will literally take months to get there. And yeah, so I mean, prepare. It's happening. It's just slow. Usually it's slow until it starts moving. You know what it is? It's slow, and then it gets real fast. It gets fast real fast as well, and then people suddenly start panicking. Oh, what do I do? What do I do? And at that time, you already fucked up, basically. If things already started to run and you missed out on this. Sorry, my hair is driving me nuts. I've been yeah. Those who have long hair will know, when you have it in a thingy for too long, you get a headache and you get like, your scalp nerve goes bananas. Oh, that's so nice. Oh, that's so nice. Anywho, yeah. What's Casey saying? Let's see. Casey, you got a beautiful legend. Without you, I have no viewers. Considering I have 2,000 plus subscribers on my YouTube channel, and I have one guy watching, is freaking insane. I'm gonna acknowledge that. Also, considering that it's crazy how YouTube doesn't let my members know that I'm live and whatnot, which happens quite often. How do I know that? I talk to my members. My members like, Greg, you were live? I was like, yeah, I was live. Well, I was notified about it just today, which is like 2 days past the moment I've gone live, right? So funny how the market falls for 2 hours trade, then you say it should stop here, and then it starts to turn around for the rest of the session. Right. No, I mean, again, well, it really that depends, Casey, since you are talking from the standpoint of the community. Oh, actually, I see what you mean. Look, again, I've given it, when I do this sort of analysis, especially when I'm not really following up every single second of the day, I'm giving this sort of rough general guidance analysis, rough sketch analysis of what I'm seeing at the time. If I would want to get it right, I would adjust it throughout the day as I'm going. More so, that exercise was on purpose to show what it is that I read in the first place, sort of the quick analysis in the morning, what was the expectation, and then versus that, what is the outcome. I'm not really at all upset nor surprised by the price action not playing out perfectly as I've expected. Again, I've made the analysis actually on our continuous contract, and maybe if we compare it to the actual sort of way it plays out in a continuous contract, it will feel like I got it a little bit more correct or whatnot, right? Which is, for example, if we look at this, how was my analysis with regards to the continuous contract? As you see, I didn't even get it right perfectly on the continuous contract. On the continuous contract, my expectation for us was to go higher, roughly to that 6,900 handle, meaning higher, even higher than what we got, although not that far. It is a matter of like, what is that, 20 bucks, barely, 20 bucks, $20, yeah. So, I mean, we made like 70% of the movement, and then we missed out on this. You decide whether I'm more right or more wrong. It really doesn't budge me one way or another, you know. But yeah, and that actually happens when, although it is a bit weird, I would have expected it to play out this wedge. That's kind of very normal for the market to do. I guess it's not what it's meant to do in terms of cyclicality, although arguably if it did do that, it potentially could have done that. It's just maybe more so because that was so expected, it ended up playing this way instead. That's kind of a trickery thing with options and how the institutions make the various small-time Joes burn through their cash. And yeah, still, again, it does not fully mitigate the potential of retest of these levels, given how we may be seeing a form of a head and shoulders here, which I'm not going to completely remove off the table. This is a bit wonky, I would say, man. I would say, I mean, obviously, first of all, inevitably there is probably an internal head and shoulders hidden inside here. It's just not that greatly visible right now. It probably is on an angle, potentially this one. And so just as an example, these things can actually take an angle and they'll have to show up as we expect them to, meaning if you look at the current trend as it's playing out, we may end up seeing our head and shoulders playing out, of course, sort of this way, which is still very much a correct pattern, not pattern breaking by any means. Maybe even some excessive retests. We've seen this sort of behavior before, guys. I'm not gonna, I mean, don't be all that surprised. It's not that excessive. It appears excessive when you zoomed in on it, but when you look sort of, when you take a couple of steps back, you realize it may play out this way absolutely easily. It's nothing all that out of the ordinary. Kind of normal to look and see the, zoom out and see that the price action can play out with such what feels like prolonged movements. In fact, they're not that long. Okay, so before my voice completely shuts down, I will end this live. First of all, because the market has closed. The market closed as we didn't even make it back to that 6,800 and 450 area, if you will. And on the regular contract, we ended up closing on what would be, let's see, I mean, that's 6,836 basically. This is where we're at. Okay, I'm gonna keep that just coming for us for next week, right? And just, I'll remind you again, even if it does climb back up the way I sort of expected it initially, don't forget about that marking. So even if it's gonna do this and then of course test, don't expect it to be just a straightforward, hit and run, right? Very, very rarely that it does that. It only, if you expand to higher time frames, larger time frames, it only appears this way. Of course, on the fragmented, smaller time frame, it will appear to do this. So as such, basically retest multiple levels again and again and again, and only then break down. On the larger scheme of things, as you saw, the price action, or rather the momentum, appears to be significantly bearish. So it doesn't really matter whether we break down here, or here. The overall trend is significantly pointing downwards. So be attentive. And as I said, be prepared for the significant pull down that's going to bring us potentially to lows we haven't seen in quite a long time. Of course, we're not going to just plow through, but more likely than not, we will test some of these already known levels on our way to these lower levels, coming back to that 6,666. Relatively, again, in relativity, I don't mean day 2, 3, 4. It may take months, a month, 2, maybe, easily, but headed towards that direction. Also, yeah, it actually can happen within like a couple of weeks, just saying. Anywhere between a couple of weeks to a couple of months, and anywhere in between that. Alrighty, boys and girls, and Casey. Well, Casey and the rest of you who will watch. And the ninjas, the secret ninjas who I have. Secret ninjas. That's Casey, those are my bodyguards. They follow me everywhere. That's the ninja clan, my brother. You have some sorry, I had to. Anyway, love you all. Casey, you're a beautiful legend. See you, my beautiful members in the community. Oh yeah, before I do drop, again, that's the Discord. This is the address below me here, right here, thingy. Woo! Right here is how you join. Have a good weekend. Likewise, brother. This is how you join, and there's plenty of nice things. And those who want to know about the one-on-one academy, I'll let it show up right here on the screen for a second, inquire about it. Although I would arguably say it probably is going to be full by the weekend. I'm pretty sure I have already three people gunning for it, and it's a matter of time until somebody grabs it. And so I'm fairly certain within a day or two you'll only be able to reserve a spot which will become available within a week or two. Of course, then you have to prepay, otherwise you don't reserve yourself a spot. That's it, boys and girls. You all have a wonderful weekend. See you in the next one. Bye bye.